Shockingly, I won't be talking about sperm whales very much today, but about the lessons that I think one learns after a life with whales, and I think things that probably Roger and many of us who have spent a lot of time with these animals have taken away. And it's really an honor for me to be here amongst all of you today to honor Roger, because I think many of us were inspired by him to sort of dedicate our lives not only to understanding the whales, but convincing everyone who doesn't understand the whales about why it's an important thing to do. And so before I go anywhere, I just want to highlight how amazing this photograph is. And in my mind, it's entitled, One Passionate Person, a Boat, and a Pelican Case Can Change the World. And I think that's it. So many of you knew Roger far better than I did, but having done my PhD with Hal, I'm a small part of Roger's academic lineage anyways. And as Bernd highlights very well here, I'm deeply grateful for the shoulders that have lent me inspiring views. So I thought I'd use this time today to sort of think about the broad takeaways from a life with whales. And I'm sure these are things that Roger knew and anyone who spends time with the whales understands. So the first one is culture is strong. You know, Roger was the son of a musician and an electrical engineer, which perhaps encapsulates why he was destined to accomplish the things that he accomplished. He brought engineering and the musicality of song to humpback whales and changed the world. With his two parents' gifts, he learned to understand whales. Now, I remember the first time that I met Roger out in the wilds of the San Diego Marine Mammal Conference. He had literally walked off the pages of National Geographic magazine and books and scientific papers and into the real world of a human being going about their day-to-day life. And he certainly was larger than life. Both physically, he's not a small man, but his personality filled a room just like humpback whale song did. We first met in a meeting called the Cachalot Consortium, which is the sort of one-day afternoon workshop where all the sperm whale people get to meet up in this larger conference of all marine mammal scientists. And this was 2005, so just at the end of the voyage of the Odyssey. And he was there after amassing this amazing worldwide data set to share all of his excitement about what would happen next and what we were going to do with this amazing new global data set. But he was keen to hear everybody else. And ironically, it was this huge room, and the sperm whale meeting is never usually in the huge room. And it was this massively round table, and he sort of sat court, as King Arthur would have, on the round table, listening to everyone as excitedly as him and Ian were sharing about the voyage of the Odyssey. And we only spoke very briefly. And in passing, he must have caught word that I was really nervous to give my very first scientific talk in front of all these legends of papers and magazines, and in particular to use the names that we had given the whales in the scientific talk. You know, I'd just gotten back my very first scientific review, and how, you maybe remember, we had a meeting about this in the hallway in San Diego, about how we were going to reply to the reviewer who said absolutely under no condition should you not use anything but catalog numbers. And that hurt, and I was terrified because my whole talk had all of the names of Fingers and Thumb and her family, you know, as if they were individuals. And in his sort of simplistic, direct, and all-knowing way, he just said, "You know them as individuals, don't you?" And it was this sort of simple and true and powerful statement that sort of imbued me with confidence to go forward and not really worry about it. And Roger's research spoke to this very much directly. The longitudinal study in Argentina still stands as one of the largest and longest studies on baleen whales as individuals, tracking southern right whales across decades. And I'm certain in his first few visits there, he never realized how the whales in this place would change the course of his life. He said, "I came to Patagonia hoping to find a species whose individuals I could recognize and place, and a place where I could study them with relative ease. But most importantly, discovered the land and the people of Argentina, and for me, it was love at first sight." I know that I feel this exact same way for the research that we've done in Dominica. And I remember after 3 days of sailing from Puerto Rico the very first time, straight into the trade winds, which was not very good sailing, we arrived in this mirror calm lee behind Dominica, surrounded by blows. And I knew that we kind of had arrived at some form of promised land. I think we all knew very quickly in that first month how unbelievable it was. And I'd love to say that it was our acumen as scientists and biologists, but we had just found the right place where the whales were willing to share in their lives. And so we knew that this would be a magical place to study individuals. But at the time, I don't think I realized, at the end of my master's thesis research, how important this place and these animals would become in my whole life. So lesson 2 is family is critical to your survival. And I think this is a really important truth both for the whales and the teams that we build to study them. Whether we're talking about matrilineal units of sperm whales or pods of orca or networks of female dolphins or even mother-calf pairs transiting huge swaths of deep ocean by themselves, who we choose to share our life with makes us who we become. We've heard many stories last night at dinner about how Roger brought out the best in people and inspired them to share in this communal vision of how to change the world. I skipped one. And over the course of his years in Argentina, this team grew and grew and grew of researchers who visited and worked there, expanding his scientific family, so to speak, to succeed from many different fields. Pushing the boundaries of what science was and technology could do to answer questions that were just pressing on his mind. And as Daniela has said, both today and in the past, they were doing work with drones before they were even drones yet. And yet, this new family of roboticists and engineers and biologists did the unthinkable, tracking whales with drones over Argentina, following individuals in a way that Roger couldn't do before. But his pioneering steps in Argentina are really hard to quantify, even if you summarize the entire field of marine mammal science. And I think this quote really gets to it. Now, I remember reading this paper when I first started working with Hal as an undergraduate student, and this title really struck me, that how could it be that it wasn't so long ago that the debate in our field was, should we kill them or not? And that this kind of thing was still ongoing. And what drove a lot of Rogers and Hal's early work was simply to show that you could do science without killing them, that we couldn't justify whaling by means of scientific research. And today, of course, many of us in this room think deeply about gentle robotics and delicate deployment strategies of minimally invasive technologies and how we interact with whales. It could be argued that one of the technologies that changed the way we did science was photo identification, the way that we take pictures of animals to recognize them as individuals. It was non-invasive and drove a huge shift in our approach. It and Roger pioneered our ability to study whales as individuals. I think if I've learned one thing from studying whales, it's that they're individuals. Each one's unique and not interchangeable with any other, and plays an important role in their family and the community that they live in. In my mind, photo ID is the basis for all whale and dolphin research. It's a tool for applied conservation, but also for behavioral research and understanding the whales. And it all started from Peninsula Valdez. And today, of course, computer vision and AI help accelerate this process, both here with the work that's happening at MIT and all the novel work that's happening in Project CETI, or also just based on global data sets, which include all of the photos that were taken by Roger and his team off Peninsula Valdez. Photo ID is made more powerful at scale, and collaboration is key if you're going to answer global or ocean basin-wide scales. And no research group can really study these things in isolation when whales are so mobile. Unless, of course, you have the vision that Roger did, in which case you conquer the globe as a team. As I found out reading the magazines in my grandmother's basement as a kid, as Roger was still battling the end of whaling, As we shifted from killing whales intentionally to doing so mostly out of our own ignorance, before I was born, Roger says in National Geographic magazine in 1979 that he saw that ocean pollutants would replace intentional killing as the biggest threat to whales, and that he recognized that there was a total absence of information about all of this, and sort of set his eye and the focus of Ocean Alliance on solving that problem. Now, it took until the year 2000 for the mission to set sail, and I think one of the unwritten lessons in all of this is that whale life is very long and slow, and so can be whale science sometimes. But his mission set sail in 2000, a global survey with a big focus on sperm whales, actually, and brought together researchers from around the world. And for me, who started my undergraduate degree in 1999, this was a legendary boat. And its crew were sort of the rock stars of marine mammal science. There's this small set of research sailboats that people aspired to be on and were inspired by the people that were there. If only one day you could be named a crew. And in 2009, the results began to come out, a full 30 years after Roger's predictions, and ultimately the prognosis about contaminants was not good. And yet, so much could be accomplished with a small, dedicated crew and a boat to call home. Now, in parallel, there was this other small set of passionate researchers aboard a small sailing vessel, bringing the methods and approach that Roger had helped lead into the world of sperm whales. Like Chris, who will speak later, and Peter Tyack, who's here now, Hal was one of those original sets of students working and learning Roger's approach. Now, Hal's missions to Sri Lanka and the long-term research, this era of marine mammal science seems to be lost to Google. There are so few images of these pioneering days that aren't in someone's houses. And yet this one is out there, thankfully. It's lovely. Actually, he has a whole collection of photos of his grad students imitating him in this photo up on his wall in his office. It's pretty great. Anyhow, Hal's mission to Sri Lanka and the long-term research that then started in the Galapagos set the stage for many of the methods and approach and the culture that would lead to me being here today. In the 70s, aboard his small boat with a small team of friends and researchers, Hal set out to show that you could do high seas research on sperm whales, you could identify the individuals and learn their behavior, and we didn't need the whaling ships to do it. We didn't need to kill entire families just to understand who they were. And Hal's decades of research off the Galapagos put many of Roger's techniques, mixed with Hal's maths and sailing, to the task. And his sampling methods and data collection standards brought forth this new understanding of what a sperm whale was. And much of what we know today about what sperm whales are and who they are is from Hal's research on sperm whales, of them as individuals, in families, who speak a dialect by all of the families that are in the same clan. The culture of how we conduct research passed on from Roger to Hal has taught us about the culture of whales. And in this research program was mostly carried out on board Balena. Now, Balena often makes me personally think of this quote by Captain Malcolm Reynolds. And it goes, "Do you know what keeps a boat afloat? Love." One can know all the math in the universe, but if you take a boat out on the ocean and you don't love it, she won't keep you up as sure as the world turns. Love keeps her up when she's ought to fall down and tells you she's hurting before she keens. Love makes her a home. And this brings us to the third lesson. All of these passionate people need a home, a platform to be amongst the whales, a place to build a common vision, to learn together from families on the other side of the surface. And after spending decades of working around the South Pacific, Balena's next home would become Dominica. And I'm so very and deeply grateful for my time learning from Hal. Not just the maths and the sailing and the lives of the whales, but how to see the whales, what scientific collaboration looks like, and our responsibility to the whales. One amazing thing about science culture that I thought I'd bring up today is that the data collection methods pioneered by Roger and formalized and standardized by Hal are still in place today in the sperm whale project. In fact, it was only last year that we switched to an iPad data collection system and passed our paperwork. And if you go to Hal's original book about the voyage to the whales in Sri Lanka, there's actually a picture of some of the data sheets, and they're not too far from the way that we use them today. But what the DSWP was able to do beyond what Hal had done in his years in the Galapagos was to come to know the Eastern Caribbean sperm whales as individuals, to define and follow families across years, almost 2 decades now, and to learn the nuanced differences of what it meant to live in family L or family T or family V. And unsurprisingly, really, it shouldn't be in any case, each family had their own way of doing things, learned from generations of strong female leaders. And that's the 4th lesson, is learn from your elders. For both whales and for us as researchers, this rings very deeply true. And from Roger to Hal to the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, and now CETI brings together all of these lessons. We've built a really big family of linguists and roboticists and engineers and cryptographers and biologists and acousticians and computer scientists, and I probably could go on. And we have this beautiful new boat to bring our new family to the whale families. And we've learned from our elders by listening to Roger and using the existing data we had from the Sperm Whale Project and applying methods from Hal as a springboard towards new questions. Now, you'll hear from others in Project SETI later today, but I wanted to show one slide of new work, and it kind of encapsulates a pivot that I think Hal once talked to me about. He said that his career from maths to biology and working with sperm whales went very well because what he had learned mathematically was good at dealing with sparse data sets, big matrices of lots of zeros, and that his expertise in statistics and his mathematical view allowed him to see patterns in all of those zeros. But increasingly, our data sets are getting less sparse and more continuous, and that would require a new set of skills beyond statistical inference. And I think SETI delivers on this prediction. You know, this is a complicated plot of one dive of tag data, and it links acoustics with movements and other sensor packages. And for me, it addresses a question that's still sort of outstanding, which is what happens at the bottom of a sperm whale dive when they're hunting? You know, there's this sort of outstanding scientific quandary about sperm whales, is that pretty much their dive behavior looks similar pretty much everywhere in the world. But we know that their diet is different in different parts of the world. And so everything we know about whale culture, you know, suggests that clans might be having different foraging strategies. So how can these dives all be the same around the world? So Pernille, who is a postdoc on the biology team for SETI, based out of Denmark in Aarhus University, is looking at the complexities of this bottom phase of the dives. And here she's starting to find links between when echolocation starts and gliding and active swimming, but also about how buzzes, which is that active acoustic sound that you hear when whales, we believe, are catching squid, seem to occur at large body inflection points, and that there's these predictable movement patterns right before the animals make an attack on the squid. So this opens up all sorts of interesting questions about how whales feed and the differences between these families and global clans, and it's an exciting step in this continuous data collection. And that's lesson 5. The big takeaway for me for my work on SETI thus far is that we need to work together to overcome big obstacles, and I think Roger would agree. This diverse team is taking big steps forwards, and we're accelerating our science. You know, Roger was frequently considered a rule breaker, given his propensity to share theories about whales that had not been scientifically proven yet. He did this because he was convinced that the amount of time we needed to generate change didn't correspond to the timescales of science. This comes from a long collaborator in Peninsula Valdez. And so the last lesson, I think, is act now. Now that we know so much about whales and the problems that they face, what are we going to do about it? And I think Roger says it quite well. I do have hope that actually, I do have hope, lots of hope actually, but only because the alternative to hope is giving up, and I guarantee that would be fatal. The bottom line is that we simply need to change our minds Avoiding the destruction of our species is a solvable problem. So I'll just finish by reading something I wrote sitting on board Balena at the end of the 2019 field season, maybe a month after the very first CETI meeting. And I think, at least, I believe that it's something that Roger would probably feel quite deeply too. Our little family is on the boat, and their little one is below it. Us and them, separated by the surface. On the boat, we're all passionate about the ocean and how it defines our planet. We talk about our day with the whales around dinner as if we are all in one family. We share in their successes and their failures as if we belong with them. But mostly we talk about how to get people, the public, to care about these animals and struggles they face living as our neighbors. And the challenge is that we ask ourselves, why is it that we care? Why are we here? What drove us to follow the lives of whales and makes us stand up for them? And how do we get other people to feel some of that? How do we convince them that whales belong on our planet as much as we do, that us and them are a part of the same community? While this happens, below the boat is a story of the other side of our family, of whale families like Digits, who was entangled in fishing gear, struggling to survive for 3 years while towing a rope that exhausted her. Mostly because of our neglect on how and where our food comes from, their lives for our ignorance, her mom having to nurse her despite her age, and how the utensils stuck with them through the challenges of her injury. And then her miraculous recovery, her return to the deep once again, feeding as an adult, and how all of that could have just been avoided if we stopped ignoring our neighbors. The whale story is about building bigger definitions of us. They are fundamentally different from us, but ultimately the same. In a world that seems more divided by arbitrary differences, perhaps more than any time in my life, their story is about who we can see as us and how we can change and expand that. My science has been about how whales recognize each other, about their identity as individuals and families and clans. But I think my life's work has been about learning what it's like to be a whale, to grow up in the deep, to belong in an ocean family. And in the vast darkness of the ocean, family is survival. It's been a great honor to spend so much time among these whale families, and in doing so, I have built my own. And until they can speak for themselves, those of us above the surface will have to speak for those below. So thanks to Roger for all of that.